We once again thank Prime Minister Trudeau for his words, for his participation in this panel and in this morning. And as chair of the B20 CEO group, the International Business Advisory Council, I'd like to here stress the importance and collaboration across business, across government, and across civil society as we all work to overcome the fundamental economic challenges, as the Prime Minister said, of restoring global growth and creating more jobs. So we have a great panel this morning, a panel that really feeds into this golden triangle of government, business, and civil society coming together. You heard from two G20 leaders. You're going to hear from the heads of all the major international organizations and also members of business CEOs today, and hopefully it will be a rich dialogue. But before I start on our panel, I'd like to give the word to both the chairs of the B20 and the L20, and like to thank on behalf of all of us Rıfat Hisarcıklıoğlu and Tob, and for a great B20 organization, great hospitality. And let's give him again a big hand. And I'd like to ask him to make a few remarks, starting with you, Rıfat Bey, and then also to the head of L20 Turkey, Mr. Atalay.
Thank you, Muhtar. What we done, we do all together. So I thank you and your team, honorable G20 leaders, chairs of international organizations, dear guests and colleagues. First of all, I strongly condemn the terrorist attack in Paris. What happened in Paris, it has happened the humanity to the values of humanity. Let me extend our condolences to the people of France. Welcome to Antalya and to B20 summit. For the first time, B20 and L20 leaders came together with G20 leaders. This is a landmark in the G20 history because as three most important stakeholders, governments, business, and labor, we are together to talk on the global economic issues. Because we have shared a goal, we want to increase the welfare of our citizens. Therefore, we need economic growth and we need to generate more jobs. And we can do this with joint work and agreed policies. As B20 Turkey, we have worked to develop recommendations on the world's most pressing economic issues. These are issues that directly have impact on business owners, entrepreneurs, workers, and public at large. We have developed 19 recommendations. All are very important, but I want to emphasize 5 most important needs. Firstly, we need more trade. As you all know, global trade is slowing down. This year it will grow less than 2%. This level of trade growth could only be seen in global crisis times. So G20 has to solve this issue. And as B20, we want ratification and implementation of trade facilitation agreement. Our second issue is infrastructure, because we need more infrastructure. As you all know, the world is facing a huge infrastructure gap. G20 has to solve this. We are asking two things. First, we need more transparency and clear country-specific infrastructure investment strategies. Second, we need asset-based financing for infrastructure projects. Our third issue is on SMEs, because we need our small businesses to grow. Small businesses have lots of problems, and they have to be integrated to the global value chains. This is why we are asking for a global advocacy platform for SMEs. This year, for this reason, B20 established the World SME Forum Foundation. We need G20 leaders to endorse this new platform. Fourth issue is about our future. because we need better skills for our youth and women. As B20, we believe that increasing the employability of women and youth is key for the unemployment. Technology is changing very rapidly, and we need more adaptive skills. For this reason, we are asking G20 leaders to develop skills which is still under process. Finally, our fifth issue is on macroeconomic policy coordination, because we need more trust and transparency. As we move into the phase of post-crisis global economic management, the G20 faces new challenges and should act collectively to adapt to changing conditions. The G20's macroeconomic policy coordination can become even more effective with regular consultations with the private sector. To build better bridges, the B20 could take part in the mutual assessment process in relevant G20 working groups and within the global standard setting bodies such as the FSB. Let me stop in here. I think today's panel has the capacity to comment on these issues. And as the global business community, we expect solutions to these problems. We must continue to strengthen the relationship between B20 and G20. Especially, we need more interaction between CEOs, ministers, and leaders. Because when governments and business community work together, issues can be easily approached from different perspectives. Hope today's interaction between G's, B's, L's will have better results. I look forward to our continued dialogue. Thank you very much.
Very much, Rufat Bey. Now I'd like to pass the word over to Ergun Bey for his words, representative of the L20.
Ergun abi sen de.
Uluslararası kuruluşlarımızın değerli başkanları, B20'nin, L20'nin değerli temsilcileri, kıymetli konuklar. Konuşmama başlamadan önce Fransa'da gerçekleşen terör saldırısını şiddetle kınıyor. Hayatını kaybedenlere Allah'tan rahmet, yaralananlara acil şifalar diliyorum. Terörden en fazla etkilenen ülkelerden birisi olarak Fransız halkının yaşadığı derin üzüntüyü paylaşıyoruz. Geçtiğimiz bir yıl içerisinde İTÜK, TUAK ve G20 ülkelerinde faaliyet gösteren diğer sendikalarla birlikte çok yoğun, başarılı bir çalışma yaptık. Dün itibariyle 2 gün süren L20 zirvemizi tamamladık. Türkiye'nin G20 başkanlığında L20'nin önceliklerini ve politika tavsiyelerini dile getirdik. Herhangi bir sorunla karşılaşmadık bu dönem içerisinde. L20'nin var olması gereken platformlarda var olduk. Böylece önümüzdeki yıl Çin'in G20 başkanlığında yapacağı L20 çalışmaları içinde iyi bir zemin oluşturma imkanı bulduk. Bunun yanında işveren kesimini temsil eden B20 ile iyi bir diyalog içerisinde çalışmalar yaptık. Bu diyaloğun sonucunda uzlaştığımız konularla ortak bir deklarasyon yayınladık. İş dünyası ile çalışan kesimin aynı masada oturmasını ve sorunlara birlikte çözüm aramasını ve somut önerilerin ortak bir bildiriyle G20 zirvesine taşımalarını son derece önemli buluyoruz. Bu nedenle asgari ücret tüm ülkelerde yeterli bir seviyeye yükseltilmeli, emeğin milli gelirden aldığı pay artırılmalı. Ayrıca bunu sağlayabilmek için tüm ülkelerde toplu pazarlık sistemleri güçlendirilmeli. İkinci neden, büyümenin yanında nitelikli yeni iş olanakları oluşturulmalı. Tek başına ekonomik büyümeyle yetinmeye çalışan ülkeler daha fazla sosyal sorunlarla baş etmek zorunda kalmaktadır. Sürdürülebilir ekonomik ve sosyal dengeyi kurabilmek için daha fazla insana iş imkanı sağlamak zorundayız. L20 olarak bu konuda iş yaratacak büyük altyapı yatırımlarının yapılmasını öneriyoruz. Ayrıca işlerin insanoğluna yakışır olması gerektiğini söylüyoruz. Değerli katılımcılar, değerli konuklar, öncelikle dünyayı kasıp kavuran genç işsizliğe çözüm bulmak mücadele kararlılığında olmalıyız. Çalışmak istenmesine rağmen iş bulamayan milyonlarca gencimizin işe yerleştirilmesi, beceri edindirme eğitimlerine ağırlık vermeleri, teşvikler getirmeliyiz. Gençlerimizin geleceğe güvenle bakmalarını sağlamalıyız. Üçüncü neden ise cinsiyet arasındaki eşitsizliğin devam etmesidir. Ücrete ve iş gücüne katılımında eşitlik sağlamak zorundayız. Kadınların iş hayatına dahil olabilmesi için çocuk ve yaşlı bakımı gibi hizmetlere daha fazla yatırım yapılmasını sağlamalıyız. Dördüncü neden olarak da kayıt dışı ekonomiyi gösterebiliriz. Tüm ekonomilerin sosyal güvenlik ve koruma sistemlerini tehdit eden kayıt dışını mutlaka kayıt altına almalı, iş yerlerini güvenli hale getirmeliyiz. Değerli katılımcılar, L20 önerilerini ve B20 ile ortak deklarasyonumuzu sizlere sunduk. Ancak G20 ülkeleri bugüne kadar zirvelerde verdikleri sözleri yeterince yerine getirememiş, tespit ettikleri hedeflere ulaşamamışlardır. Son söz olarak G20 ülkelerinin zirvelerde belirlediği hedeflere ulaşmak için daha fazla çaba sarf etmesi gerektiğini ifade etmek istiyorum. L20 ve B20'nin bu toplantı ile aslında küresel ekonomi ile ilgili sorunların çözümünde söz sahibi olmanın isteklerini somut bir şekilde ortaya koymuştur. G20 ülkeleri krizin olumsuz etkilerini ortadan kaldırmak istiyorlarsa çalışan kesimin bu önerilerine mutlaka dikkate almalıdırlar. G20 çalışmaları çerçevesinde geliştirdiğimiz bu üç taraflı diyaloğun gelecekte de devam etmesini diliyor. Dinlediğiniz için hepinize teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Atalay. Thank you. So what we're going to do now is ask some of the CEO business leaders for comments, very short comments, a couple of minutes each, please, and then we'll turn to our distinguished panel. I'd like to start with my friend and colleague, the CEO of Nestle, Mr. Paul Bolke. Can we get a microphone over in the second row to Mr. Bolke? Can you just stand up, Paul? Yeah. Can we get a microphone, please? Thank you. Paul?
Muhtar, thank you. I'm going to speak about trade. In other words, I'm going to speak about irony, because we all know that trade is a driver of growth. We all know that trade is driving economical and social development. And with that, also, it's not about only selling products, it's also about producing them.
Can you
at
get
the same time,
closer, Paul?
At the same time, you hear better now? At the same time, we also see that world trade is going down, and that many protectionist measures that came after the financial crisis are still there, and that's the irony. But we have a bright spot on the World Trade Agenda, which is the facilitation agreement that came after 10 years of hard negotiations. They came 2 years ago, and only 50, slightly above 50 countries that have signed the agreement have ratified them. Of the 106 or the 110 that we need to get it in force, of the 160 who signed it, there's only one ask then. Why is the G20 not showing, of which some didn't ratify yet the agreement? Some of the G20 didn't ratify yet. Why is that leadership of the G20 not showing leadership, going beyond the agony of the next elections, and think about the broader context of free trade in the world that is will increase employment, what is so hardly needed, and will shape future investment that is going to have and bring results later on. Perspective, long-term thinking, leadership, that is what we ask for.
Great comments and great message to the leaders of the G20. Next, just don't take the microphone away. Just stay there. I'd like to call on Francisco Gonzalez, who's the co-chair of the Financing Growth and Task Force work stream, and also chairman of BBVA Bank. Francisco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Muhtar. A couple of comments. We are seeing the lowest growth rate since '09. Therefore, growth should be the next target for everybody. And the policy recommendation developed by the Financing and Growth Task Force are based on two pillars. First, to make SMA funding easier, and second, to improving financial regulatory framework. In order to make easier for the SMEs funding, to get funding, this group recommends two things. One is to gather data in order to have more data about what's happening with the SMEs, in order for them to have more means in terms of tax breaks or having their collateral better known by the banks. And second, to develop a new sort of tools in order to have more finance, alternative lending mainly. The other question is regarding regulation, improving regulation, the financial regulation. It seems 8 years since the crisis started, and we have seen a lot of new regulation coming over. Our group recommends that it's time for the authorities to pause and to recalibrate the measures and to, in some way, to reach a trade-off between growth and having financial macro stability. And just finally, a couple of words about the impact of technology. I would like to draw the attention of the authorities about what is happening with technology. The impact is terrible. What we have seen over the last years, in order to know what the so-called exponential technologies are doing, is tremendous. Big data, artificial intelligence, blockchains, the clouds also are impacting tremendously in many sectors, and particularly in the financial sector. Our view is that something must be done by the authorities in order to set up a new regulation with two targets. First, to iron out the hurdles in order to give that, to let those technologies going forward, and second, to have a level playing field for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to call on Ferit Şahenk, who is the co-chair of the B20 Infrastructure Task Force. Ferit, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Muhtar. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants. As the coordinating chair of the B20 Infrastructure and Investment Task Force, I'm honored to have the opportunity to present our key recommendations on infrastructure and investments to G20. We all know the world's reality. I will not comment on that. I think the experts are sitting there. We are in a moderate global growth stage in the world. So we need the infrastructure investments, increase growth in employment. We all know that it helps the world. Secondly, infrastructure investment gap is in the world today is estimated around $15 to $20 trillion until the 2030, and this needs to be addressed. We aimed at two issues. First, to contribute to 2% additional growth target of G20, and secondly, how can the infrastructure investment gap be closed in the long term? We came out with two ideas. First one was the increasing public investment in infrastructure via country investment strategies based on each country's own realities. Secondly, identifying steps for channeling long-term private finance to infrastructure as an asset class. I think this is the most crucial and more difficult one that we are challenged with in the world today. We all know that institutional investors have over $60 trillion of assets under management, but only 3 to 4% of this is currently allocated to infrastructure. Secondly, the long-term investment needs match these people's investment characteristics very much because they have the predictable cash flow, they have low default rate, low correlation with the other asset classes, we all know that. So the final thing is that we need to improve the infrastructure investment ecosystem. This is a very, very crucial subject. We have to improve the infrastructure investment ecosystem to channel long-term private funds to infrastructure. As Mr. Gonzalez also talked about it, we need a real changes in the regulatory environment. This is a very crucial subject. And as the countries, we talked about them, they have to come with very bankable infrastructure projects. Investors wants to see a clear return, the risk, whatever they look at in their investment strategies. And also, I think this will go to Mr. Guria very much, is that we need more efficient and more institutional investor-friendly PPP models in infrastructure. And in order to do this, we require the involvement and collaboration of multinational organizations with G20. This is very crucial. Not but for the least is that PPP projects, we have a good track from Turkey, and our president talked about this, Mr. Kent, is that we have 200 PPP projects worth around $116 billion. It's completed and underway, and Turkey can be a very good example in initiating these PPP projects as a good case study. We need a securitization of infrastructural assets. This would include the use of innovative financial instruments and asset-based financing in infrastructure. Securitization would facilitate the exchange of infrastructure investments, which in turn, I think this is also very important, will broaden the investor base in the world, so that infrastructure investment can be a tradable equity, asset class, whatever you want to call it. Last but not least, we need obviously better project development, procurement, and approval process. My talking was a little bit too long, sorry, Chairman, but I would like to thank you on behalf of the 190 members from 32 countries of the B20 Infrastructure and Investment Task Force. I personally made a lot of people, a lot of friendships this past year. I will miss them, but I'll be still around. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And finally, as far as the voice of business is concerned, I'd like to call on Yu Ping, who will be coordinating the B20 for China's leadership of the G20. Where is Yu Ping? There, right there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Muta. Well, first of all, I'd like to express congratulations to Turkey for a very successful B20 presidency this year. Next year, China will take over B20 presidency and we will ensure continuity. Next year, many of the topics that have been discussed this year in Turkey presidency will be continued, will be further discussed during the China presidency. At this particular moment, I'd like to draw your attention to two particular issues. The first is we would like to see that G20 plays a full and active role in some areas. They are global economic governance, establishing trade and investment cooperation mechanism, and facilitating environment under the G20 framework, and also maintaining multilateral trading system, supporting free trade agreement, and opposition to trade protectionism. Trade among G20 countries accounts for 80% of the global total and plays a crucial role in the worldwide economy. But currently, G20 trade and investment mechanism is lagging behind with no regular trade ministers meeting scheduled. Therefore, we believe it is quite urgent and absolutely necessary to institutionalize trade and investment cooperation under G20 framework. Trade and investment are important sources of economic growth and job creation. Furthermore, B20's promotion and maintenance of multilateral trading system and regional trade agreements are practical and should serve the interests of all stakeholders. We believe that regional trade agreements should be pursued on the basis of supporting and complementing the multilateral trading system in perspective of industrial and commercial sectors. Secondly, we will strive to faithfully implement trade facilitation agreement, streamline custom procedures, and enhance efficiency. At present, as we've heard, only about 10 countries have approved TFA. We hope the other countries will do the same as soon as possible. Next year, we'll try our best to do as good as Turkey has done, and we hope to have your continued support and assistance as well as participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuping. Thank you. Good luck for next year. Thank you. So now we're going to turn on to the panel and to the leaders of the international organizations, and I'd like to start with Managing Director of the IMF, my good friend Christine Lagarde. And again, on behalf of all of us here, heartfelt sympathies for the terrible, tragic events that happened in Paris. Please.
Well, thank you very much, Mitar, and good morning to all of you. I thought I would share a few personal thoughts with you, because I was born in Paris. I lived the happiest years of my life in Paris, and I was actually in Paris on Friday night. And I just want to share with you the sense of complete denial, followed by panic, followed by shock, followed by horror, and soon sorrow because of what was happening. We just didn't know whether we could leave home, leave the place we were with friends. There were children who were not answering the phone at that point. And many of you have gone through that. I had not. And I was probably very privileged. Now I'm saying that not because I want to make you cry. I'm saying that because I think that we can all do something. And I was always skeptical that messages of support, messages of warmth, I've always suspected that they were a little bit ridiculous and excessive, but they are not. So if you have friends, if you have subsidiaries, if you have employees, if you have people that you care for in Paris, send them a message. It makes a big difference. And to move from that stage where you feel totally exposed and vulnerable to feeling strong again and feeling resilient and having the desire to overcome the atrocity and overcome hatred with charity. To move to that stage, you need the support of others. And the business community, whether it's B or L, and I would like to commend you for having managed to bring B and L together, because I'm a veteran of the Bs and the Ls, and I had to attend 2 different meetings. So now you're together. You can also do something to continue to support, to continue to engage, to continue to be there. I heard you, Mitar, you said that your next board meeting will be in Paris. Well, there are a few little things that you can do, all of you, to express solidarity, not just with the city of Paris, but with any place where shock hits and where horror pains. And there is a clear link between that and the objective that the Turkish presidency has endorsed to actually reduce youth unemployment. I thought President Erdogan put it beautifully in saying that it has to do with jobs, it has to do with hope, it has to do with looking forward to a future. And clearly, Bs and Ls can actually work together with that in mind. Minus 15% of those young people who are likely to be left alone is a great objective, and one that I hope you will endorse in your respective field. From the IMF perspective, as managing director of the institution, I could talk about all the things that you have on your boards out there, but I would like to focus on one, which is actually a common denominator for all and which we can all talk about. Mark can talk about it, Angel can talk about it, so can Roberto and Guy, and that's infrastructure. Because infrastructure is something that is almost a no-brainer. And I would like to endorse the comments made by the head of the special task force working on infrastructure. Historically low interest rates at the moment in many countries, maybe not specifically in Turkey, but in many countries around the world. An unbelievable booster for growth perspective, both for the short term, because the infrastructure has to be built, has to be developed, has to employ people, but also an unbelievable medium and long-term booster to growth and particularly to productivity and improvement of factors of productivity which are incredibly low at the moment. They create jobs as well, whether you're talking about hard or soft infrastructure, whether you're talking about improving the bridges and the highways or building schools or hospitals. They do create jobs. They're not in the soft side of it. And final pitch, Mitar, if I may, there's a lot of infrastructure projects going on. Wherever you go around the world, there are lots and lots of cranes, lots of buildings coming out of the ground. Well, I bet you that for most of those projects, there's a 20% output that is left in poor management, corruption along the way, and various lack of efficiency that can be tackled. Those are areas where the IMF works, will continue to work in order to help the management of infrastructure project. We're working together with financial institutions, particularly under the leadership of Mark, to see how infrastructure financing can be better accounted for. And we're very keen to help support Islamic finance in that with a degree of security that is very specific to Islamic finance because of the presence of collaterals and asset-based financing. We believe that Islamic finance can play a significant role in that respect. So it's a big boost to infrastructure that we would like to encourage, that can bring public and private sectors together. The public sector investment in infrastructure, it is also at a historical low and should be increased. So you see there is a link between all of that, from infrastructure to improved productivity, to better growth, to more jobs, to more hope, and maybe one day to less atrocities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Now I'd like to turn to Mark Carney, who's the Governor of the Bank of England and Chairman of the Financial Stability Board. Mark, can we have your comments, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mukhtar. Let me offer my support for the people of Paris, this terrible event. Let me also reinforce something that Christine knows very well, which is that the City of Lights has always been a beacon of progress. A number of us are going to be in Paris over the course of the next few weeks, particularly at COP21. I'll play a minor role in that. Many of you will play a major role. Christine will play a major role in that. And I think we have to remember the focus on the future and what the French have brought particularly to this process, but just consistent with their long history of a focus on progress, a focus on the big issues, and ambition, and we have to realize that ambition when we come to Paris, and that's the best way to honor the situation. I'm going to pick a different banner up here on SMEs, although I'm happy to talk to infrastructure if people want. And I want to speak to it in terms of what are the prerequisites for growth. There are many prerequisites. Two of the most important are financial stability and regulatory certainty. That comes out clearly in the B20 report. It comes out clearly in Paco's comments. Just put a number on the issues around financial stability. The cost, the cumulative cost of the financial crisis now is running at a quarter of global GDP, $16 trillion and counting. That's adjusted for demographics. That's the difference in terms of the potential, and it's untold differences in terms of human potential when you think about the lost jobs and human capital that's come from that. So what is, and the president, Turkish president, others have, and the B20, the L20 have rightly focused on SMEs and entrepreneurship. What are the best channels to get capital to SMEs? Well, first and foremost, it's the banking sector. That's one of the reasons why we focused on the banking sector. And I would say that we are now in a position where we can begin to provide regulatory certainty to the banking sector. Think about what's happened over the course of the last 7 years. Capital's up 10 times, liquidity's up 4 times, interbank lending has been cut in half, trading assets have been cut by 1/3. This is a sector that has been transformed in every single advanced economy now, and it has been the case in emerging markets. Bank lending is now growing. The capital is there. The core initiative that we have accomplished this year, and I remember 3 years or so ago, a dark night in Basel. There's many dark nights in Basel, but this was made slightly better by having dinner with Sharon Burrow and John Evans. And one of the demands of, rightly so, of the L20 was ending this heads I win, tails you lose capitalism at the heart of the banking system. We, subject to leaders' endorsement over the course of the next couple of days, are putting in place all the tools now to end that. And the key to this is this TLAC agreement, total loss absorbing capacity, to end too big to fail. With that, all the main components are in place. We will have to do some things to adjust some of the risk weights and other elements, which I think, my personal view is, will further advantage lending to SMEs. There already are advantages in relative terms now that the banks are capitalized, but we are likely to further advantage lending to SMEs because that is a core competency of the best banks, and the way the system's going is we want banks to focus on what they do best and have the wherewithal to do so. I'm going to finish on another element of inclusion, financial inclusion, that we shouldn't forget. And I think this goes to some of the broader issues. One of the things we have seen in the quite appropriate fight against money laundering and terrorist financing has been a huge increase in uncertainty, regulatory uncertainty for financial institutions about what is required of them, what's the best way to go about it, where's the capacity in a variety of countries. These are some of the most vulnerable countries in the world. What we have seen, the IMF has cataloged this, the World Bank has cataloged this now, we're seeing about 40% of the most vulnerable, of the countries in the world actually seeing a decline in correspondent banking, some of it quite severe. So they're being cut off from the global financial system. This is not a good thing. This is not an effective way to combat terrorist financing. It is not an effective way to bring obviously you can't keep countries and companies and small businesses as part of the global system. So we now have an action plan which we've developed with the IMF, with the World Bank, and across the FSB to dimension the problem, to build capacity in these economies, to use technology and to share information so that we can prevent the issues that are harming our system, but keep countries in the global system, ensure that SMEs have the access to the global system, and those who want to trade have the access to trade finance. This is something the industry has helped us very much with. So we're committed to work forward on this. Last point I'll make, one of the core recommendations last year of the B20, as I recall, was impact assessment. It came up today. Look at the reforms, what's the impact, and give everybody a very clear assessment of who's implemented, who hasn't. I'd commend you to read the first implementation report of the FSB, which was published over the course of the last week, will be discussed by leaders. We're going to continue to do this and challenge us on it to make sure that it's meeting your expectations, because now that we have regulatory certainty, the issue becomes implementation, implementation, implementation. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for those words. And next I'm going to turn on to Angel Gurria, Secretary General of the OECD. And Angel, if you can also in your remarks refer to what was being said about the TFA, Trade Facilitation Agreement, and why do you think that 10 of the 20 G20 countries have still not ratified that, as was mentioned by both Güler Sabancı yesterday in the panel and today by Paul Bolke. Thank you. Angel, the floor is yours. If you can, if you can pull the microphone, thank you.
Right. Well, first of all, let me say that, Mukhtar, at the OECD, we are Parisians. We are based in Paris. All 2,500 of the officials at the OECD. And this is the city where we work, where we live, where most of the OECD people decide to retire. It is the city which we love. And we've gone out very publicly, categorically denouncing these attacks. And clearly it calls for greater and deeper, broader cooperation. And the leaders around the table, there is a segment where we were going to discuss terrorism, we were going to discuss migration, but these were going to be like kind of sidelines. And of course now it goes front and center. Let me just say, we're opening tomorrow at the OECD. Fatih Birol and I, the head of the IA, decided that we are going to go ahead, as scheduled, with a ministerial meeting of the IA that is taking place this next week. And the French government has decided they're going to go ahead as scheduled with the COP21. We will all be there in force. So just let me quote this 80-year-old woman at the Place de la République last night. She said, we are not afraid. So, you know, life goes on. We will be more cautious, but we are not afraid. Now, it's 7 years since the crisis, Mukhtar. Slow growth, high unemployment, growing inequalities, the collapse of trust. These are the legacies. Growth is not happening. This year it's below 3%. It's slightly above 3% next year. A little bit better at 2017. But even in 2017, we're going to be below the cruising speed of the pre-crisis. Okay? It's that bad. The 2% target that we did for 2018 at the G20 is still at below half of the target if we do everything that has been committed so far. We are far from getting there. Now, which are the sources of getting back on track? Well, trade has been discussed. Trade is going to grow at below the rate of growth of global GDP this year. This has happened only 5 times in the last 50 years. And every time this has happened, it's been the harbinger of a recession. I'm not saying it's going to happen automatically that we're going to have a recession because we have low growth of trade. But we've been warned. The writing is in the wall. We have to put everything that we can on the table in order to stop this from happening again. Now, we've been working very hard on decoding the trade genome. We now know a lot more about global value chains, about trade and value added, the services, which are much more protectionist than trade itself. And, of course, the TFA. The TFA, as was mentioned, offers a lot of hope. Marcus said if we can only get the TFA going, you know, this is the new version of lowering tariffs because tariffs are low enough. So we should get going there and, again, use Nairobi, put together the TPP, and hopefully finalize the TTIP. But investment has been mentioned many times, particularly investment in infrastructure. There we have a problem with the regulations of the sectors, and then we have a problem with the regulations on finance. Again, you know, with Mark here, clearly there is a lot of work to do because it's like climate change. These things are man-made, which means we can undo them if they're wrong or do them better, you know, if they need to be fixed. The problem is we've been in 20 international meetings, and the single word that gets repeated again and again is investment, investment, investment. It's whether it's the IMF and the World Bank and the OECD and the G20 and the G7 and all the Gs, you know, and we still cannot detonate investment. It's not happening, and clearly investment are the seeds of tomorrow's growth. If we can't get investment going, it's not going to happen. And here I'd like to say Marcus' idea about having rules of engagement for investment, particularly in infrastructure, and the idea of Ferret about talking about having specific rules for the PPPs in the engagement, how we can do that better, are absolutely critical. We are going to have to go national to make this work. We've had the diagnosis. It's good enough. We know what the problems are, but we are going to have to go national with national investment strategies, and in particular national infrastructure investment strategies within a broader context. Credit is not flowing either. That's a third leg, and it's flat or negative in some, in particular to SMEs. You know, Mark very appropriately chose SMEs as a subject. Credit is not flowing to SMEs, and the traditional engine of growth of the last 10 years, the growth of emerging market economies, that has slowed down. So you have a trade, you have investment, you have credit, and you have the EMEs slowing down at half speed. So why are we surprised that we have such sluggish, such mediocre growth right now? All of this has produced massive slowdowns, sometimes negative growth in productivity. Productivity is slow and down, whether you're talking about the UK, the United States, or Mexico, or Turkey, everywhere. And productivity is the only thing that will allow us to keep growth going in the medium and the long term. And productivity involves investment. It involves skills. You know, we were with the L20 yesterday talking about how we need to do the upskilling. It involves, of course, a very deliberate policy about innovation. Bad news on the innovation front. The diffusion of innovation from the leaders to the rest of the economy has slowed down considerably. That is a very serious problem. It's another area where it is producing this slowdown in world growth in general, and it is affecting SMEs again in particular. And then, of course, there's the regulatory and the governance issues. Let me just say, Mukhtar, to finish, the I about inequalities, meaning the way to deal with inequalities, i.e. inclusiveness, has to drive everything we do from now on, including the way in which we address productivities. Inclusiveness for the SMEs and global value chains, on education, on health, on job opportunities, salaries, quality of jobs, etc., because inequalities have been growing, and we now know, we have measured, we have ascertained, we've compared, we have benchmarked that the growth in inequality hurts growth. Therefore, one more area in which we have to focus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angel. I hope Roberto and Guy have better news for us, because as CEOs here, having heard that, I'm not sure how we can increase our investments. We've got to find a way also to channel our investments with some belief that the future is brighter than today. And that's, I hope, some of the news that will come out of the G20 leadership here that can give us that impetus. Roberto, floor is yours.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Mukhtar. And I have to start by expressing my full solidarity with all those touched by the tragic events in Paris. Not only in Paris, actually, because I think if anybody is still under the wrong assumption that this is a French tragedy, he's missing the point. This is a global tragedy, and we have to address it. If we don't understand that, we're going in the wrong direction to begin with. So, Christine, if you can, at least on the part of the WTO, be the bearer of our solidarity to the French community and to the Paris community, that would be appreciated. I'll be there soon for the summit and many other times. I'm not changing my schedule in any way because of anything that happened recently. So let me start also by thanking the B20 and the L20 for the work that they have done. extremely important. I don't have to preach to you about the trade and how it helps to develop the economies, create jobs, development. You are already on our side of this cause. I'm very appreciative of the joint statement as well, which makes these links between jobs growth and decent work very clearly. The recommendations from the B20, particularly the ratification of the trade facilitation agreement, has been expressed here several times, improving the global trade system for the emerging digital economy. That's also something very important. Halting protectionism, rolling back measures of trade restrictive nature. All of these things are very important. All of these things we deal with in the WTO. I'm very happy to see that that's on your agenda. We will meet exactly 1 month from now on the 15th of December in Nairobi, and that will be an opportunity to deliver more things. We have important outcomes on the table. But what is most important, I think, is to realize that over the last 2 years, we have delivered for business and we have delivered big time. I think the Trade Facilitation Agreement is a clear example of that. The Information Technology Agreement, which we're finalizing as well, that's another 1 trillion plus deal. We are working on the Environmental Goods Agreement, which is also extremely important. So we want to make this a habit, to deliver for business, to deliver for jobs, and we have the tools to do it. And we have been using these tools over the last 2 years. Either whether we do it multilaterally with all the members on board, like we did for the Trade Facilitation Agreement, or where we have critical mass, but not the whole membership on board, like we're doing for the Information Technology Agreement and the Environmental Goods Agreement. But there is a message that I want to send to you here today, and it's important because the right people are here, and it's important that they hear this very clearly. I think that over these past several years, there has been a big distance between the WTO and the business community. I think we have to shorten that distance. It is true that governments respond to businesses, and it's true that governments somehow bring to us your own views, your own priorities. But we need to hear directly from you certain things. So we need to talk about what is on the WTO agenda and what is not on the WTO agenda today. We need to hear from you what the problems are. We mentioned here today, Angel just said that, several times we talked about investments. Now let me tell you something. Every time that I talk about investments with someone, they mean a different thing. They're looking at this from a different perspective. They're talking about different things. That investments is a very, very broad word and term. Now, if we want to do something about it, we need to know exactly what you mean. We need to know exactly what you want to do. And each one of us, each one of our organizations, wherever we are, and we're going to hear Guy talking about that as well, we can do something. We can't do everything, but we can do something. What is important from the WTO perspective is to understand what is it that we in the WTO can do. And for that, we need you. We need you, and we're going to be bringing you to Geneva. So get your frequent flyer miles card ready. We're going to be asking you to come to Geneva. We're going to be asking you to look at all these things that you have been talking about here from different perspectives. And I don't want necessarily all of you to be like-minded. The more diverse-minded you are, the better. Because then we understand the problems and we understand the challenges. So be ready for that. We heard today about infrastructure. We heard today about investments. We heard about digital economy. We heard about SMEs. SMEs provide 90% of the jobs across the world. 90%. It is unbelievable that we do not talk about this in a structured fashion, for example, in the WTO. So we need to change that. What we do after Nairobi, as far as I see it, is as important as what we do at Nairobi. So we will need you for that conversation. Be ready for that. We want to listen, so be ready to talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Thank you
One
for
more,
that.
may I ask, just add to the Trade Facilitation Agreement, just to say, to be fair, these governments only had, right now, November, 11 months, because the protocol was only approved at the end of last year, although the agreement was agreed into December 2013. We did not have the protocol agreed. You all remember this novella. The whole year of 2014 we spent trying to agree the protocol, so they had only 9 months. We're halfway there. 51 countries have already ratified. Many have to go through lengthy legislative procedures. I talk to every minister and every head of state and government that I meet. I talk about that. I haven't heard so far anyone say that they are not going to ratify. They're all working, they're all pushing. It takes a little bit of time, but thank you very much for your support. You have a job also in your national constituencies to push this through.
Thank you, thank you. And last but not least, certainly, Guy Ryder, my good friend from the head of the ILO, if you can please give us your comments, and then we'll close the meeting. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mukhtar. Good morning, everybody. Let me, too, add words of condolence, sympathy, and solidarity to the government of France, the business and labour communities, and their people. You know, those of us who marched to La République after the Charlie Hebdo attacks in January, as I did, we'll be back. We'll be back later this month at the COP21, and we'll continue to be shoulder to shoulder with the people of France and the values that they hold dear. Let me just make my brief comments. Let me sort of start and finish them with the notion of inclusiveness. I think one of the great merits of the Turkish presidency, and it's reflected in this gathering, has been to make inclusiveness both a method of the presidency and a sought-after output from the presidency. To all intents and purposes, we live in a global market economy, and it is absolutely imperative that we bring our efforts together, and this is inclusiveness as a method, to ensure that that market economy serves the interests of all, of the producers, of business, of the workers, of consumers, and of all those who are not at the present time benefiting as they should. And here's my point. At the ILO, our job has always been to make the market work for all, in conformity with the objectives that we all share. And the point is that business and labour join governments in making that happen. And that's why it is so encouraging not only to see business and labour 20s get the place that they need in the G20, but to produce from that the declaration that they have, which I want to congratulate them on. It is truly added value to the work of this G20. Now, we're hearing today, as we absolutely should, what the business community and what the labour community expect of the G20 governments, and your messages are pretty loud and they're pretty clear. I want to add one more dimension to this story. If we are going to do what we want to do, it depends also critically upon how the B20 and the L20 interact, not only internationally, but also nationally, and also in workplaces and enterprises. So what happens here has to find its reflection in collective bargaining, in dialogue nationally and in workplaces. And that is the logic also of your declaration. I want to simply underline the importance that you've given to skills and jobs, getting young people into work, everything that you have said together about investment in infrastructure, support to SMEs, active labour market policies as well, in order to boost growth and to boost jobs. We haven't heard, I'm surprised, Christine, about women's participation, but we know how important the G20 targets on that and meeting them is. And I also want to add the imperative, particularly in our developing and emerging economies, of ensuring the transition from informality to formal employment. So here are my last words about inclusivity. One is the replication of the processes we're seeing here in Antalya, at the national level, in your workplaces, in your enterprises. Business and labour working together to bring results. And secondly, the need, and I want to echo what Mark said, about turning declarations into action. Looking back at past G20 declarations, my records show that it's since Pittsburgh that we have been talking with slightly varied language about the need for strong, sustainable and balanced growth and job creation. We're singing from the same hymn sheet. I wonder if we think the results obtained so far are good enough. And I think the last word is, it is not by declarations alone that this job is going to get done. Implementation, implementation, implementation.
Great way to end. That's what we like to hear as CEOs. Execution and implementation. Thank you. And once again, give this wonderful panel and the rich discussion a big hand. Thank you. Thank you.